of Hero City at Draper University. Joining Andrew will be Mr. David Needle, who's a technology writer and editor. And for those of you who are not aware of this, we have an expo session on the second floor of this building. So whenever you feel like going to talk to startups and some of the blockchain organizations, you can feel free to join them. And for directions, please talk to our staff on site. Thank you. Welcome.
Morning.
Morning.
Okay, hope everybody can hear me. Show of hands, how many people here currently have an investment in cryptocurrency or blockchain? Own some. Okay, and if we go back, keep the hands up. If we go back 3 years, how many of you had it even then? I see no hands. I see a couple of hands. Okay, gives us some context. And certainly you have, Andy. I appreciate it.
Inadvertently.
Well, this is great. Well, one thing I wanted to kick off the discussion with, and what a great conference, by the way, is it's the start of the baseball season, and seems like an apt metaphor for that. If you look at blockchain as a whole, or maybe cryptocurrency in particular, comparing it to a baseball game, what inning are we in? Why do you feel that way?
Perfect American analogy, right? So is spring training considered as an inning?
Field, is that
with every respect to the current entrepreneurs in blockchain, I think what I mean to say is we're probably in the early stage of a 7-game World Series championship. So it's a long, journey ahead. While I think we have done a lot of good work, but this is merely the beginning, and I often compare this to internet, the first go around.
Yep.
This is either 97 or 99, I'm not sure. But if you take sort of the 10-year view, it really doesn't matter because it's such a foundational shift. So that if you have a 10-year investment horizon, whether it's your money or your career, it's pretty interesting in 2003, 2005.
Now, we would be farther along with crypto in particular, versus blockchain as a whole.
That's interesting. I mean, you see there's the technology innovation, there's also the speculation. I think the speculation piece is quite active. If you compare the amount of transaction on the chain, how much of that is due to natural traffic conducting blockchain business versus people just trading tokens for speculative, financial gain? If I were to guess, it's probably 1 to 99%. So it does mirror 99, 97. These internet stocks start trading pretty actively before the internet business really taking off.
And are you comfortable where, let's drill in on Bitcoin a little bit, to the extent that's a standard bearer of where crypto is, and you think it is that always going to be the case, and you're kind of comfortable looking at what you're saying? Are you kind of comfortable where things are now, because it's gone up and down, obviously?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I would say in 97, 99, there was Netscape that certainly seemed like a pretty awesome tool.
Take a little.
Right, or you could even say in 99 there was TCP/IP, right? And there's still TCP/IP today. So is Bitcoin Netscape or TCP/IP? Most people will argue it's TCP/IP, but I would say it's still early. It certainly has a commanding lead, and that lead, and it's got a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
But I do think you can't underestimate the brand power and then the early movers advantage.
There's that arrows in the back of the pioneers argument, but being first is, it's the best. Being first is not a bad position.
Right, it happens both ways. It's awesome. So you could have the mind share, you could have the branding, but sometimes you do become the pioneer for the next group of winners.
Yeah. Well, let's pull back a second because I want to talk to you as an investor. And we heard AI mentioned at the end there in that fascinating talk. There's a lot of investment opportunities. How do you decide what to invest in? How does blockchain fit into that mix?
Yeah, great. So I essentially look at just kind of take a step back. I have three primary investment theses. I mean, I love blockchain, but my world doesn't revolve around blockchain. I have three sort of crazy investment theses. One is immortality, right? So we're looking for things that keep people living for a long time, or longevity. The one is colonizing space, and the last one is chrysopia. Chrysopia is basically the art of turning lead into gold. So that's another way of thinking about blockchain. Gold has been a very important, discovery in the human evolution. Blockchain is something that can potentially replace that in trade. So we look for two main things in all of these areas. Two main things. One is the market has to be big enough, and second, the team has to be the right group of people. Why is that important? So market, oftentimes the startup risk itself is so high that if you quote unquote get lucky, all the stars align that you're successful in attacking a business, then the outcome has to be big enough to justify the risk, right? So in other words, most of these venture calculations is actually very simple. It's potential outcome times the probability of success, right? So if the probability of success in most ventures is so low, right, the potential outcome has to be big enough for the expected value to make sense for risk adjustment.
So that doesn't eliminate the investment, but the upside has to be used.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the team, of course, we oftentimes lose a lot of investments because of team reasons, whether the teams don't get along, the team's family may not be supportive after year 5, all kinds of team
But you
issues.
talked about staying power initially. Just to drill into that a second, I'm 10-year horizon, that kind of thing. I mean, that is obviously part of the evaluation, right? When does this thing have legs? Clearly you're not looking at how can we make money in a year.
Right.
It doesn't seem to be it.
In fact, that's almost a negative signal because you know that there are too many temptations, right? The kind of people who are extremely good at making the expected value calculation in the short run would almost opt for a big company job versus a startup. Right? If you take the expected value of anyone's time, it's actually most valuable if you go work for a big company. Right, but if you take an expected value of a much longer horizon, like 10 years, then the startup is better. So you can naturally screen out certain people who are actually more suitable for large companies, and we like those people too, right? Because these are the people who are business development partners and whatnot.
So you mean like we've all seen the startup driven by the technical CEO who really isn't the person to run a company long term?
Yeah, we actually like those kind of CEOs. We think those CEOs oftentimes are passionate about technology and want to take it to the marketplace.
Yeah.
There's almost a little bit of irrational, devotion to the business, and that's the kind of sentiment that carries you from year 3 to year 7, right? And oftentimes the business sort of die in year 3. Because you build a prototype and the customers take a long time, you can't raise money. The rational thing is actually to quit, to shut down the company. But it's an irrational thing in the short run, but the rational thing in the long run that kind of carried it through. And that's how you build really big companies.
Okay, we talk about the short term. Are there other red flags? We do have a lot of investors here. Are there red flags you see when you're valuing this? I mean, one that comes to mind to me is uniqueness, or if in fact one of many.
Yeah, so we actually don't mind investing in a competitive field. To a certain extent, it's a validation of the market, right?
Yeah.
But the key is to find the best team in the field. I mean, Google is a good example. We're not a good investor in Google, but they were probably in a highly competitive search engine field when they got started, but it was a
sort of the common view that they invented search or something. Obviously,
right, but obviously
there were other
Lycos, Excite, the list goes on, right?
Yeah.
But so you don't have to be the first to the party, but you certainly have to be unique enough and to sort of have that staying power.
And one of the things, again, that was discussed a bit in the last session, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
By the way, that was an awesome talk.
That really was. green card.
Yeah.
The cryptocurrency is the name of the game right now in the financial area, but there are other opportunities, and I think I saw something on one of your talks where you even mentioned groceries or food business. What are the other opportunities in blockchain?
It's pervasive. I think blockchain is so fundamental that it's the second coming of internet. Right? And I often refer this to as an internet square. And the fundamental driver is this: if you look at the computational power in the x-axis, and then the bandwidth in the y-axis,
Yeah.
right? So blockchain is basically that z-axis. As computational power increases and the bandwidth increases to everyday consumer, every one of us has a phone in our pocket, and these things are where's my phone? Very important, it's like my brain, right? These things become servers, right? This is no different from a server in a bank. So we have all these servers floating around at $500. Actually, some of these phones are free. So it changes everything, right? So it really, when you think about internet revolution, there's internet 2.0, 3.0, shared economy, all that whole internet. Blockchain, I think it's the internet square because it takes that third dimension of combining bandwidth and computational power and put the distributing computing into every one of the consumers. So it affects the way we do finance. That's the low-hanging fruit. Most people think about payment. And you have smart contract. It changes the law profession. It changes the media entertainment industry in terms of profit distribution. It changes the food industry, manufacturing industry. Based on the IoT, you can start tracking the goods, how they were manufactured, the history. It changes everything. So it's very pervasive. It even changed the way it might be governed one day, right? Governance, e-government. So I think it's such a fundamental change in the way we humans communicate with each other. So we're just seeing, going back to baseball example, this is a spring training of a long baseball season that ends with a 7-game series world championship.
And we're very, very early.
Very early.
If you were, I don't know if there's such a thing as Blockchain Magazine, but if there was, and they were doing their end of the year issue for 2018, what would be the feature story or the headline, do you think? How significant is this year in the evolution?
I think this year is important because it is the first time I feel that mainstream consumers are getting this awareness, right? It actually started, if you trace back to the Bitcoin price, just using it as a proxy. It was around Thanksgiving time when the Bitcoin price started climbing. And many people attribute it to Thanksgiving dinner. One person comes to the turkey dinner and then they told him about the rich stories about Bitcoin. Everybody go and buy. And we're investors in a lot of exchanges, and our portfolio can't keep up with the new account opening, right? And that was the biggest challenge. But it's so quickly you see that Bitcoin price start crashing and correcting in Q1 of this year. So I think this is definitely the blockchain technology getting indirectly introduced to the public through Bitcoin. Most people still don't know what it is, but now they're beginning to get a taste of what it could become.
I meant to mention this earlier. Andy said something very dangerous to me at the we met briefly ahead of time, which was he said, feel free to ask me anything. So.
Okay, please.
But crypto obviously and Bitcoin and blockchain clearly cuts across geographic boundaries. But is the U.S. where it's happening, or where are the hotbeds from that point of view?
Good question. In spring training right now, I think it depends on industries. I think, or depending on the layer of the architecture, I think in the mining space, it's still, China, and China is probably dominant. And then in terms of exchanges, it's moving very quickly. If if you see the exchanges, they've moved from US and China to now Japan. And some of these governments have very favorable and tolerable policies that will attract these exchanges. So it's moving very quickly. Whatever is sort of the flavor of the day today will probably be very different next year. But one thing I do notice, blockchain compared to other type of early stage startups that we invest, blockchain companies are very international. One thing I didn't address is, if you look at the major change in startup this year compared to 10 years ago, is really the idea of harnessing those two axes, computational power and bandwidth. It allows international startups to collaborate, right? And combine that with open source movement. If you look at any white paper, you see this is like a United Nation, and you see oftentimes people don't work from the same office, right? So idea of having great companies coming out of Silicon Valley, it's going to become a little bit sort of spread out.
Level planning, more of a level.
Yeah.
Because what's the entry point? I mean, what's the cost of? It's pretty low.
Right, and you have the best of breed. You can find the best backend developer, you can find the best Solidity programmer, and they may not necessarily be living within 10 square miles of each other. Right? In fact, oftentimes they're different nationalities.
I don't pretend to understand the complete depth of this, but you mentioned mining. Is there really a valid concern here that the actual computing power to support this big infrastructure is somehow beyond our grasp at some point, or how do we deal with that?
I think this is a dynamic equilibrium, so it'll continue to change. If you look at this, again, as a lone baseball season, you're going to have some parts of the season where someone's batting 1,000, and it's not going to last. So it's a self-healing system, I think. When you have 50% of the mining happens in China, some other miners will start picking up. And I think in the long run, it's a pretty, I like to believe it's a pretty resilient network. It will have problems, just like the internet. It will have all kinds of problems. Regulatory challenges, technical challenges, consumer confidence, all of that. But I think over time, if you look at the fundamental technology, it actually is pretty deterministic. We need a major IT upgrade across all industries.
Right. Across all blockchain?
Blockchain is the IT upgrade that's going to happen to media, to food, to government, to...
But you're not saying blockchain needs to upgrade, you're saying this is
the upgrade. The IT upgrade is blockchain, is to take advantage of all these servers in your pocket.
Right. That's amazing. One of the things I remember from the dot-com era before the bust was one of the ways companies got invested is they said, look at all these eyeballs, look at all these customers. And in retrospect, at least, that became kind of a cautionary tale that really wasn't, because that wasn't real. Is there any analogy in what you see today where things are being hyped for kind of the wrong reasons?
Absolutely. This is such a great example. I'm glad you brought this up. I remember I was at an investment bank during the dot-com days.
Yeah.
We were valuing company first based on profit, and then based on revenue, and then based on future contracts, and then based on number of customers, eyeballs, and then based on the number of engineers. Does that sound familiar? And then, and then there was a correction. Today, you see some companies being valued based on, first based on, I don't think there's any profit, based on maybe number of users, and then the quality of the team. And then the latest metric is the number of people on Telegram in their community or group. So I think it's a phase. I think, when I hear stories like that, it doesn't make me more nervous because I've seen it go through. Because at the end of the day, these internet businesses are awesome. Right? You look at, there are plenty of internet businesses that went out of business, but the ones that survived, in fact, the second group of internet companies that share economy, or these e-commerce companies that were built from the failed internet business, they're pretty awesome. So I do think it's a necessary and natural phase to go through, but just don't get too overly excited.
Your hairs as an investor, though, along the way, yeah.
You can, but not if your job is that investing, you're seeing this and you have a strategy, that strategy's dollar cost averaging. So when it's really exciting, you don't want to overinvest. When this is really sort of looking very depressing, you don't want to underinvest. So you kind of just keep it even keel, same amount of investment, put the work. And over time, what you'll find is that the long-term investment thesis is actually very easy to predict, right? Humans will live over 100 years, you know, less than 100 years ago, our average life was 40 years, and now it's 70, it doubled, right? So something will come along. Blockchain technology, they will upgrade and hire IT infrastructure. It's just very deterministic if you take a 20-year view. But what you don't want to do is make a 5-year bet, and then you may get caught with your pants down.
So I'm kind of thinking this through. I'm thinking maybe you have an end game here of investing. You've got investing in immortality. It's going to be long enough to see the blockchain come to realization.
That's right. That's right. Prioritizing immortality so we could see the end of blockchain.
And you know, two quick things I wanted to mention. One is if nothing else comes to this, look up Internet Squared. And on the internet, there's some great videos of what you've done talking about many of these topics. What we're checking out on YouTube, I think.
Yeah, it's actually on our company's website, drapertv.com.
And you also have a conference yourself?
Yeah, we actually, so as part of what we do, so we started with venture investing with, Tim's fund. And today we have a US dollar fund, a renminbi fund in China, and then most recently we also have a crypto fund. Really, we try to listen to our customers, and our customers are entrepreneurs and our limited partners. And then we also have a nonprofit arm that does education. And then, so that class is sold out, that's in April, so it shows you the excitement of the blockchain course, 1 week course. We are still looking for partners and sponsors, and if you are interested, feel free to talk to our folks.
I haven't looked at this. I mean, is blockchain filtered out to the university level? Are you guys pioneering
it's
there?
Beginning to. And in fact, that's one of the things that we try to do is we try to fill that void.
Yeah.
We see a lot of the entrepreneurs want to get into blockchain but don't know how. So the education piece is important. So it's done through Draper University. In fact, we'll have a course on immortality, a course on colonizing space. Because that seems to be the gap between venture capital and traditional higher ed. Right? So we really try to fill that gap.
And then looking ahead 3 years, how big do you think this conference will be?
By the way, one thing I've noticed is it's a sort of temperature gauge for how hot a topic is.
Yeah.
Most of the blockchain conferences are sold out, within 2 to 3 weeks. So in 3 years, it depends on where we are in the cycle. Right? Yeah. I think this is easily a 1,500, 5,000 people.
Yeah.
I think this is huge.
And one of the things that, and I don't know if this is more an urban legend, but I think we touched on the gold rush earlier, the original gold rush, that the story is that the people who made the money were selling the picks and shovels. They didn't have conferences then, but if they did, they probably would have made money. But are those areas of investments as opposed to directly in the currency itself?
It's interesting you mention. I think we don't invest in we never invest in just the token itself.
Yeah.
We invest in technology, right? If the course of investing in technology requires us to buy into a token, we have the crypto fund that does that. But we started investing in the picks and shovels. That's how we got into Ledger, Coinbase. And that's precisely the investment thesis. We'll continue to do that, but I think to an extent there's some interesting blockchain companies like VeChain in China. In fact, we were in 2 of the top 3 blockchain companies in China. VeChain made a seed investment there, and then we incubated CUDA, the 3rd largest in China, out of Draper University. So that was a guy and a piece of paper.
Wow, that must have been a heck of a pitch.
Yeah, I tell you, at early stage, they're all heck of good. They all look good. It's just a matter of time before they become here.
Well, we're wrapping up, but basically you're very optimistic about where things are headed.
Yeah, absolutely. If you take a 10-year view, the future becomes very clear. Right? My job is really easy because I make 10-year predictions. I can do that every day, all day long, in any sector. It doesn't take much, right? But it is very difficult to actually, spend your time, dedicate your time, 10 years of your time doing one thing, even though you're going to go through tough times. Everybody thinks you're going to be crazy or delusional, but you got to keep going.
Buckle up. What a fantastic discussion. Please thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Andy and David.